He was kicked out on his 18th birthday with what his stepmother called a worthless inheritance. What he discovered inside that abandoned property wouldn't just make him rich, it would uncover a truth that had been buried for years. If you've ever been at a crossroads, feeling like the world has forgotten you, hit that subscribe button. This is a place for stories about finding your way back, and I promise you, you're not alone in this. The bus groaned as it climbed another hill, the engine whining a complaint that echoed the one in my own chest. Outside, the world was a smear of tired green and bruised purple twilight. Inside, I was just a boy holding a cardboard box, pretending it wasn't the sum total of his life. It was my 18th birthday, a day that's supposed to feel like a beginning, a door swinging open. For me, it felt like one slamming shut. The box on my lap was heavy with the few things that were mine, or rather, that had belonged to my father. A couple of faded flannel shirts that still smelled faintly of him, a worn leather-bound copy of a book on geology, and a small, velvet-lined case holding his collection of interesting rocks. Tucked in the corner was a thick manila envelope, the paper softened with age, its contents feeling both heavy and hollow. That envelope was my inheritance, my eviction notice, my map to nowhere. Brenda had handed it to me that morning with all the warmth of a foreclosure notice. "Happy birthday, Leo," she'd said, not meeting my eyes. Her perfectly manicured fingers had tapped on the kitchen island, a staccato rhythm of impatience. "Your father left this for you. It's the deed to that old quarry of his, Sparrow Ridge Mine." She said the name like it was a bad taste in her mouth. "It's all in your name now. The taxes are due in 3 months, but I'm sure you'll figure it out." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating as the cheap air freshener she sprayed everywhere. "You're an adult now. You're not my problem anymore." 2 years. 2 years since Dad's heart had given out while he was working on his truck. 2 years of living in his house as a ghost, a leftover obligation Brenda had been forced to endure until the calendar page turned and, legally, she could wash her hands of me. I was a loose end from her second marriage, and she was a woman who liked her life tied up in neat, profitable bows. "It's worthless, you know," she'd added, a final little twist of the knife. "He sank every last dime into that hole in the ground. It's probably flooded. Definitely a liability. But it's what he wanted you to have." She shrugged, a gesture of faux sympathy that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. Then she told me I had until the end of the week to pack my things. The bus lurched, pulling me from the memory. I looked down at the address on the envelope, scrawled in my father's familiar, slightly messy script. It wasn't a street address. It was a route number and a town I'd never heard of. Blackwood Creek. Population 412, according to a quick search on my phone before the battery died. It was hours away, deep in the part of the state people usually just drove through on their way to somewhere better. My stomach clenched. Fear was a cold, hard knot beneath my ribs. I had less than $200 to my name, saved up from odd jobs. I had a box of rocks and a deed to a worthless hole in the ground. Brenda hadn't even given me a picture of my dad. I'd had to slip the one from the mantelpiece into my pocket when she wasn't looking. It was him and me, years ago, on a fishing trip. He was smiling, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and I was a little kid with a gapped-tooth grin, holding up a fish that was almost as big as I was. Looking at it now, tucked into the geology book, felt like staring across an impossible distance. What kind of father leaves his son a worthless, dangerous property as his only legacy? The question had been circling in my head all day. My dad wasn't a cruel man. He was quiet, thoughtful. He could spend an hour just looking at a rock, telling me the story it held, the millions of years of pressure and heat that had formed it. He saw value where other people saw dirt. But this felt different. It felt like a mistake, an oversight, or worse, proof that Brenda was right. that he'd lost his mind at the end, pouring his love and money into a project that had no future, leaving me with nothing but the fallout. The bus finally hissed to a stop in what I assumed was the center of Blackwood Creek. It was less a town and more a suggestion of one. A single gas station with flickering fluorescent lights, a diner with a faded "open" sign, a post office, and a handful of other dark, sleeping buildings. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, a clean, sharp scent that was so different from the city's exhaust fume haze. It was colder here, too. The chill seeped through my thin jacket as I stepped off the bus and watched its red taillights disappear down the two-lane road, leaving me utterly alone. The silence that descended was absolute. It pressed in on me, amplifying the sound of my own breathing. There were no taxis, no Ubers, nothing. Just me, a box, and the heavy, star-filled sky. I looked at the envelope again. The address wasn't for the town. It was for a rural route a few miles out. I started walking. The walk was long, the road unlit except for the occasional passing car that would illuminate me for a moment, a solitary figure trudging along the gravel shoulder, before plunging me back into darkness. My arms ached from the weight of the box. My mind raced with 1,000 worst-case scenarios. What if there was nothing there? Just an empty plot of land? What if the shack Brenda mentioned was uninhabitable? A collapsed wreck of rotting wood? Where would I sleep? The $200 in my pocket felt impossibly small, a tiny shield against a vast and indifferent world. Each step felt heavier than the last, a march toward a future I couldn't picture. I thought about turning back, but there was nothing to turn back to. Brenda had probably already changed the locks. The road eventually turned from cracked pavement to gravel, and the trees pressed in closer. The air grew even colder. Finally, I saw it. A rusted, chain-link gate hanging crookedly from a single hinge. A faded wooden sign was nailed to a post next to it, the words nearly weathered away. I had to get close, using the weak light from my dying phone to make them out. Sparrow Ridge Mine, private property. This was it. This was my inheritance. It looked like the beginning of a horror movie. The gate wasn't locked. It scraped against the ground with a sound of protest as I pushed it open. A narrow, overgrown track led into the woods. I followed it, the crunch of my footsteps unnaturally loud in the quiet. After a few hundred yards, the trees opened into a clearing, and there, under the faint light of a crescent moon, I saw it. The property. It was worse than I'd imagined. The clearing was dominated by a large, dark scar in the earth, the entrance to the quarry, a gaping mouth of shadow. Piles of gravel and rock were scattered around, slowly being reclaimed by weeds and small saplings. And to one side, there was a small, dilapidated shack. It was a simple, one-room structure, its wooden walls gray and weathered, its tin roof streaked with rust. A single window was boarded up, and the door sagged on its hinges. It looked abandoned, forgotten, worthless. A wave of despair washed over me, so strong it almost buckled my knees. Brenda was right. This was a joke. A cruel, pointless joke. I set the box down on the damp ground and walked slowly toward the shack. The door was locked, a heavy, rusted padlock securing it. Of course. I slumped down on the rickety wooden step, the cold seeping through my jeans. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and stared out at the dark maw of the quarry. The silence here was different from the silence in town. It was alive. I could hear the rustle of unseen things in the woods, the whisper of the wind through the pines, the distant hoot of an owl. It felt ancient and immense. I felt small and breakable. I was 18 years old, sitting on the porch of a shack I owned but couldn't get into, next to a hole in the ground that was supposed to be my future. I thought about my dad. I tried to picture him here, working, planning, believing in this place. I couldn't. It didn't make any sense. He was a practical man, a man who understood foundations, who knew the difference between solid ground and shifting sand. This place felt like the latter. I pulled out the picture from my pocket. In the dim moonlight, his smiling face was just a silhouette. "Why, Dad?" I whispered into the cold air. "What were you thinking?" The only answer was the sigh of the wind. I spent the night huddled on that porch, dozing fitfully, my head resting on the cardboard box. Every creak of the trees, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I was cold, hungry, and more scared than I had ever been in my life. But as the first hint of gray light began to soften the eastern sky, something else started to creep in alongside the fear. A stubborn, quiet resolve. This was it. This was all I had. If I was going to survive, I had to figure this place out. There had to be a reason. My dad wasn't the kind of man to do things without a reason. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, it cast its first light on the shack. I saw something I hadn't noticed in the dark, a loose stone in the small crumbling chimney base at the side of the building. It was just slightly out of alignment with the others. My heart started to beat a little faster. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had. I walked over and worked my numb fingers into the crack. The stone was heavy, but it shifted. Behind it, nestled in a small, hollowed-out space, was a key. It was old and iron, heavy in my palm. It wasn't for the padlock. It was a skeleton key, the kind for an older lock. I looked back at the door. The padlock was the obvious obstacle, but what about the door itself? I tried the key in the knob. It turned with a rusty, grating click. The door swung inward, revealing a dark, musty interior. The padlock had just been for show. My dad had left me a way in. He had left me a key. For the first time since I'd stepped off that bus, a tiny flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe this wasn't the end of the road. Maybe it was the start of a path my father had laid out for me, one I just had to be willing to walk. The inside of the shack was a single room, thick with the smell of dust, damp wood, and time. Sunlight streamed through the grimy, unboarded window on the far wall, illuminating swirling motes of dust in a single, golden shaft. It was Spartan, but orderly. A simple metal frame cot was pushed against one wall, a thin, stained mattress on top. In the center of the room stood a heavy wooden desk and a single chair. A pot-bellied stove sat in one corner, a small pile of uncut wood next to it. It was a place built for work, not comfort. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. I set my box on the cot and ran a hand over the surface of the desk. It was covered in a fine layer of grit. A collection of geological survey maps were rolled up and stored in a metal tube. A few core samples, cylinders of rock drilled from the earth, were lined up neatly. And in the center of the desk, placed as if it were waiting for me, was another envelope. This one was different. It was newer, a standard white business envelope, and it simply had my name on it. Leo. My breath caught in my throat. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was my dad's. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt cool against my skin. This was it. This was the explanation. The reason. I sat down in the rickety wooden chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. I carefully tore open the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The letter began without preamble. Leo, if you're reading this, it means two things. First, I'm gone. And for that, son, I am more sorry than words can ever say. I hoped I'd have more time to explain things to you myself. Second, it means you're 18, and Brenda has finally shown you the door. I knew she would. Don't hate her for it. She is who she is. This was always the plan. I had to stop and read that line again. This was always the plan. What plan? A plan to leave me homeless with a derelict quarry? I forced myself to keep reading. I know what she told you, that this place is worthless, a money pit, a mistake. In a way, she's right. As a mine, Sparrow Ridge is a bust. The granite is low grade, barely worth the cost of hauling it out. I knew that when I bought it. I bought it for what's underneath. Not stone, Leo, something else. I need you to listen carefully. This is important. Brenda and her family, they operate in a world of balance sheets and loopholes. They see land as a commodity, something to be bought, stripped, and sold. They don't understand value, not real value. I had to protect what I found here from them. I had to protect it for you. And the only way to do that was to make it look worthless. I spent the last few years of my life making this place look like a failed investment, a monument to a foolish old man's dream. I let the rumors fly. I let my accounts dwindle on purpose. I made myself small so that what I was building for you could remain safe. I felt a growing sense of disbelief. This wasn't the story of a man losing his mind. This was the story of a man with a secret he had guarded with everything he had. There's a safe, son. It's not in this shack. It's where no one would ever think to look. You remember all those times we went camping? Remember how I taught you to read the land, to see the story in the rocks? You're going to need that now. Go to the quarry entrance. Stand with your back to this shack. Walk 50 paces straight toward the rock face. You'll see a cluster of birch trees, the only ones on the whole property. At the base of the largest one, there's a loose rock. It's a piece of quartz with a dark vein of tourmaline running through it. You'll know it when you see it. You always loved that kind. I could picture the rock perfectly. He'd called it black lightning when I was a kid. Behind that rock is a small cavity. Inside, you'll find a flashlight and a set of my old blueprints. The blueprints aren't for the quarry, they're for the tunnels beneath it. I expanded one of the old exploratory shafts. Follow the map. It will lead you to a reinforced steel door. The combination to the lock is your birthday. All 6 digits, day, month, year. The day you made my world make sense. I had to put the letter down. My eyes were burning. I wasn't crying from sadness, but from a profound, earth-shattering sense of relief and love. He hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been protecting me all this time in the only way he knew how. This whole place, this shack, this worthless mine, it was a fortress, a disguise, a final gift he had painstakingly built for me. The letter ended with one last paragraph. Whatever you find in there, Leo, it's yours. It's your start. Use it to build a life, not to look backward. The world is bigger than Brenda's bitterness. Your future is whatever you choose to make it. Be smart. Be strong. Be happy. I love you, son. Always. Dad. I folded the letter and put it carefully in my pocket. The dust motes no longer looked like signs of decay. They looked like tiny, dancing stars. The shack didn't feel like a ruin. It felt like a sanctuary. I stood up, the fear and despair replaced by a surge of purpose. I knew what I had to do. I had a map to follow. I grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from my dad's old toolkit in the corner, its beam cutting a clean, bright circle in the dusty air, and walked out of the shack. The sun was higher now, and the clearing was bathed in a crisp morning light. The quarry entrance, which had looked so menacing in the dark, now just looked like a part of the landscape, a shadow on the earth. I stood on the porch, my back to the door, and took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. Then, I began to walk, counting my steps. 1, 2, 3. Each one a beat in a new rhythm. The rhythm of a story I was only just beginning to understand. 48, 49, 50. I stopped. Directly in front of me was a small grove of white-barked birch trees, their leaves trembling in the breeze. They stood out against the dark granite of the quarry face, and at the base of the largest one, half buried in dirt and fallen leaves, was a chunk of milky quartz. Running through it, just as he'd described, was a jagged, dark line of black tourmaline. Black lightning. I knelt down, my hands digging into the cool, damp earth. The rock was heavy, but it came loose easily. Behind it was a dark hole, just big enough for me to reach into. My fingers brushed against a cold, metal object, the flashlight. And underneath it, a rolled-up tube sealed in a waterproof plastic sleeve. The blueprints. I pulled them out, my heart pounding. I switched on the flashlight I'd brought from the shack and unrolled the stiff paper. It wasn't a geological survey. It was a detailed architectural drawing. It showed the main quarry, but then it detailed a single, narrow tunnel extending deep into the rock, with markings for ventilation shafts, support beams, and electrical conduits. And at the very end of the tunnel, a small, square room was marked with a single word: vault. This was real. It was all real. My dad, the quiet geologist, had secretly become a master planner, a builder, an architect of my future. The entrance to the tunnel was marked on the map, hidden behind a rockfall at the far western edge of the quarry pit. It looked like a natural collapse, but the blueprint showed it was intentional, a carefully constructed camouflage. It took me the better part of an hour to find it, and then another hour of hard, muscle-straining work to move enough of the smaller rocks to reveal a dark opening, just big enough to squeeze through. It was a narrow, dark space, shored up with heavy timbers. The air that flowed out was cool and smelled of stone and deep earth. It was the smell of my father's workshop, of his rock collection, of my childhood. Taking a deep breath, I switched on the flashlight and stepped out of the sunlight and into the dark. I just want to pause here for a second. Have you ever received a message from the past that changed everything? A letter, a voicemail, a story from a relative that completely rewrote what you thought you knew about your own life? If you have, I want you to let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and I think it's so important that we share these moments, these discoveries that prove we're all part of a much bigger story than we realize. Okay, let's get back to the tunnel. The beam of my flashlight cut a path through the absolute blackness. The tunnel was rough-hewn but solid, the walls cold and damp to the touch. My dad's work was everywhere. The support beams were perfectly placed. A thick electrical cable ran along the ceiling, leading from a junction box near the entrance deeper into the earth. He had run a line from a generator I'd seen tucked away under a tarp near the shack. He had thought of everything. I followed the blueprint, which was surprisingly easy to read. The tunnel went straight for about 200 feet, then took a sharp right. I walked slowly, carefully, my footsteps echoing in the profound silence. The only other sound was the faint, steady drip of water somewhere in the darkness. It was unnerving, being so deep underground, but I wasn't scared. I felt a strange sense of peace. I felt closer to my dad here than I had in years. Finally, I saw it. At the end of the passage, set into a perfectly smooth concrete wall, was a heavy industrial steel door. It looked like something you'd find on a bank vault. In the center was a circular handle and a numeric keypad. My hands were shaking again, but this time with anticipation. I raised the flashlight and punched in the numbers. My birthday, August 16th, XX. The keypad beeped once, a green light flashed, and with a heavy, satisfying clunk, the lock disengaged. I grabbed the handle with both hands and pulled. The door was incredibly heavy, but it swung open smoothly on well-oiled hinges, revealing a small, brightly lit room. The light was startling after the darkness of the tunnel. A string of bare industrial bulbs hummed overhead, powered by the generator. The room was about 10 feet by 10 feet, with concrete walls and a clean, dry floor. It wasn't a dusty cave, it was a secure, climate-controlled chamber. And it was filled with metal footlockers stacked neatly against the walls. There were at least a dozen of them. On top of the nearest stack sat one final envelope. I walked into the room, the heavy door swinging shut behind me with a final, booming echo that sealed me inside. I wasn't trapped. I was home. I picked up the last letter. It was shorter than the first. Leo, this is it. This is your foundation. I know you're probably expecting gold bars or something from a movie. It's not that. It's better. It's a choice. In some of these boxes, you'll find cash. My life's savings, pulled out slowly over years, converted from assets Brenda didn't know I had. It's enough. Enough to pay the property taxes for the rest of your life. Enough to go to school if you want. Enough to start a business. Enough to be free. In another box, you'll find documents, financial records, copies of emails, a detailed ledger. They prove that Brenda and her brother systematically embezzled from my old consulting firm for years. They thought I was a fool, an absent-minded professor who didn't pay attention to the numbers. But I paid attention. It's all there, Leo. Enough to send them both to prison. Enough for revenge. And that's the choice. You can take the money and the documents and burn her world to the ground. And maybe she deserves it. Or you can take the money, seal this vault, and build your own world. You can use this inheritance to create, or you can use it to destroy. I won't tell you which to choose. A father's job is to give his son the tools, not to tell him what to build. But I will tell you this. Revenge is a fire that burns the person holding it more than anyone else. Your life is yours. Don't spend it living in the shadow of someone else's mistakes. Whatever you decide, know that I am proud of the man you are becoming. Dad. I sat down on one of the cold metal trunks, the letter resting in my lap. I cried then. Not for my father's death, not for my own loneliness, but for the sheer, overwhelming weight of his love. He had given me more than money or justice. He had given me agency. He had trusted me. He had seen the man I could be, even when I was just a lost kid. I spent the next hour opening the boxes. The first few were filled with cash, neatly bundled and vacuum sealed. It was an astronomical amount of money, more than I had ever imagined seeing. It was safety. It was possibility. It was a future. The last box I opened contained the documents. It was exactly as he'd described. A meticulous, damning archive of Brenda's greed. I stared at the files, at the proof of her betrayal. I felt a surge of cold, hard anger. She deserved it. She deserved to lose everything, just like she had tried to make me lose everything. I could walk out of this mine, call a lawyer, and ruin her. The thought was tempting. It was a siren song of righteous fury. I thought about her smug, dismissive face as she'd handed me the deed. It's worthless. The irony was thick enough to choke on. I could make her feel as small and powerless as she had made me feel for the last 2 years. I sat there for what felt like hours, in the silent, brightly lit vault deep inside the earth, weighing 2 futures in my hands. One was built on anger, the other on hope. One was about the past, the other about what was to come. My dad's words echoed in my head. Revenge is a fire that burns the person holding it. I thought about what it would mean to spend the next few years of my life tangled up in lawsuits, depositions, and bitterness. It would mean keeping Brenda at the center of my life, chained to her by a shared hatred. She would still be defining me, even from a prison cell. Or I could let her go. I could let her fade into the background of my life, a bitter memory that lost its power over time. I could take this incredible gift, this second chance my father had literally carved out of the earth for me, and I could build something. Something clean. Something mine. I stood up and placed the box of documents back on the stack. Then I took one of the bundles of cash, enough for immediate expenses, and tucked it into my backpack. I walked to the heavy steel door, took one last look at the vault, my father's final, incredible act of love, and pulled it shut. It sealed with a soft whoosh of air and a solid click. I didn't need to destroy Brenda. My victory wasn't in her defeat. It was in my own survival. It was in the freedom to walk away. I walked back through the tunnel, my flashlight beam steady. When I emerged, blinking, into the bright afternoon sun, The world looked different. The trees seemed greener, the sky bluer. The shack didn't look dilapidated, it looked like a project. The quarry wasn't a scar, it was a landscape. It was my home. The first thing I did was walk back into town. I went to the diner, the one with the faded sign, and ordered the biggest breakfast they had. It was the best meal of my life. The waitress was a kind woman with tired eyes named Sarah. She asked me if I was new in town. Sort of, I said. I just inherited the old Sparrow Ridge property. She gave me a sympathetic look. Oh, honey, I'm sorry to hear that. That place has been nothing but bad luck. I think its luck is about to change, I said, and for the first time, I believed it. The next day, I found the number for a lawyer in the next county over, a man named Arthur Davies. He was listed as specializing in estate and property law. I called him from a payphone outside the post office. Mr. Davies, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. My name is Leo Vance. My father, Michael Vance, recently passed away. I believe you handled his will. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Yes, I remember Michael, a good man. My condolences, son. He set up a simple transfer of the deed to the Blackwood Creek property for you upon your 18th birthday. I sent the confirmation to your stepmother last week. Yes, sir, I received it, I said. I'm calling because I have some questions. And I also have some additional assets and documents that were part of my father's private effects that I need to secure. I chose my words carefully. I didn't mention the vault, just that I had come into possession of my father's personal records. He was quiet for a moment. I see. Are you in some kind of trouble, son? No, sir, I said. I'm trying to avoid it. I arranged to meet him the next day. I took a bus to his office, a modest but professional space above a bakery. He was an older man, with a calm, steady demeanor that immediately put me at ease. I didn't show him the documents about Brenda. I kept those locked away, my ace in the hole, my insurance policy. Instead, I focused on the practicalities. I opened a bank account and deposited a portion of the cash, enough to establish myself without raising red flags. We set up a trust to manage the property taxes and create a long-term financial plan. I told him my father had left me a substantial private inheritance and that I wanted to invest it wisely. Mr. Davies was professional and discreet. He asked few questions about the origin of the funds, simply accepting my explanation that my father was a very private and meticulous planner. He saw the love and foresight in the plan, even without knowing all the details. Your father was a very smart man, Leo, he said, looking over the initial trust paperwork. He didn't just leave you money, he left you a fortress. He had no idea how right he was. The final piece of business was Brenda. I had Mr. Davies draft a simple, formal letter. It stated that I had taken possession of the Sparrow Ridge property and all of my father's personal effects, including his private business records. It made no threats, no accusations. It simply stated a fact. We sent it via registered mail. I knew the implication would be crystal clear to her. The sleeping dog was awake. She could either let it lie, or she could try to fight me and risk having those records see the light of day. She chose to let it lie. I never heard from her again. The weeks that followed were a blur of hard work and quiet discovery. I bought a used pickup truck, tools, and supplies. I started cleaning up the property. I fixed the sagging door on the shack, replaced the boarded-up window, and cleaned out the pot-bellied stove. I bought a generator and ran power to the small building. Slowly, painstakingly, the shack started to transform from a ruin into a cabin. It became my base of operations. I spent my days exploring the land. I found my dad's old hiking trails. I discovered a small, crystal-clear creek at the back of the property. I learned the names of the trees and the birds that lived in them. The land wasn't a liability, it was beautiful. It was wild and quiet and real. I found a new kind of wealth here, one that had nothing to do with the money locked away in the vault. It was the wealth of silence, of self-sufficiency, of a connection to a place that was truly mine. The locals in Blackwood Creek started to warm up to me. They saw the old truck coming and going, saw the smoke rising from the shack's chimney. They were a reserved but decent people. The guy at the hardware store started giving me discounts. Sarah, the waitress at the diner, always had a hot cup of coffee ready for me when I came in, covered in dirt and sawdust. They didn't know my story, but they saw a young man working hard to make a go of it, and they respected that. One evening, I was sitting on the porch of the shack, which I had repaired and squared up. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the quarry. I was drinking a cold bottle of water, my muscles aching in the satisfying way that only comes from a day of physical labor. I had spent the day clearing the overgrowth from around the birch grove, my dad's landmark. I thought about the choice he gave me: create or destroy. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was creating something. I wasn't just cleaning up a property, I was building a home. I was honoring my father's legacy not by seeking revenge, but by living the life he had made possible for me. The worthless mine had given me everything. Not just the money, but the purpose, the peace, the sense of belonging I had craved for so long. My father had known that true wealth isn't something you dig out of the ground, it's something you build on top of it. He had given me the most solid foundation a son could ever ask for. He gave me a place to stand, a place to start, a place to be. And so that's how I found my home. It wasn't about the money in the vault or the justice I could have sought. It was about the truth I found in my father's letters. The truth that I was loved, that I was protected, and that I had a choice. He taught me that inheritance isn't just about what you're given. It's about what you decide to do with it. He gave me a worthless mine and made me the richest man I know. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to find your own definition of home or fight for your own second chance, I want you to know this community is for you. Please subscribe and share your own story in the comments below. I'll be reading them because your story matters. You are not alone, and the most valuable things in life are the ones we have to build for ourselves.